is my great honor and pleasure to introduce Dr. Luis Fernández Doblado, former Minister of the Supreme Court of Mexico, in which he served from 1981 to 1994. Dr. Fernández Doblado received a doctorate in law from the National Autonomous University of Mexico and has taught both undergraduate and graduate courses there. He served as director of the Criminal Law Seminar at the university's Faculty of Law within the Graduate Studies Division. He has been the director of the National Institute for the Study of Criminal Science, vice president of the Mexican Academy of Criminal Science, and member of numerous other Mexican and international criminal law associations, in addition to being the external advisor to the Ministry of External Affairs in criminal matters. In 2009, he was awarded the degree of Doctor Honoris Causa by the INACIPE. He has written numerous articles and essays, and his book, Guilt and Error, is a classic reference work in Mexico. Join me in welcoming Dr. Fernández Doblado.
Antes que nada, deseo expresar mi agradecimiento a las autoridades universitarias de esta magnífica Universidad de Emory por la invitación que me han hecho para participar en este seminario tan importante, tan trascendente como es la delincuencia organizada y el tráfico de drogas y el Estado de Derecho. Muchas gracias a todos por su invitación. Miren ustedes, en primer lugar, no podemos soslayar el problema tan patético que vive nuestra patria, México, con el azote de la delincuencia organizada y del tráfico de drogas, que se ha extendido en forma brutal, permeando todos los niveles. Pocos escapan al poder de corrupción que manejan los cárteles, la delincuencia organizada en general. La lucha frontal contra la delincuencia organizada, que parece no tener fin, la asociamos ahora por desgracia, con los fenómenos naturales de las inundaciones y todo eso, y entonces todo esto verdaderamente viene a crear una situación realmente muy dolorosa y patética para nuestro país. Pero no podemos quedar con las manos amarradas sin tomar una actitud pasiva. Hay que seguir adelante. Y estos seminarios forman parte de ese entusiasmo y de esa lucha por atacar estos problemas sociales, esta patología tan terrible del crimen. Bien. Miren ustedes, los poderes públicos de mi país se han enfrentado con toda decisión y valor al cáncer, al flagelo de la delincuencia organizada. Pero en esa lucha no es como la que ocurre en los conflictos bélicos, en las guerras. En las guerras, ¿verdad?, los enemigos se conocen, dan la cara, se enfrentan una facción con la otra, etcétera. Aquí no. Aquí las organizaciones delictivas atacan cruelmente vidas humanas, instituciones, todo, y atacan y se esconden, golpean y se ocultan. Entonces se hace más difícil en un conflicto bélico luchar contra estas asociaciones que se manejan en la clandestinidad, en la furtividad, y que emplean sus grandes ganancias de dinero para precipitar la corrupción de toda clase de personas. Entonces, no es fácil luchar contra estos problemas. Sin embargo, pues el Estado sigue adelante. El problema aquí tiene la dimensión de ser un problema de globalización del derecho y del delito. El narcotráfico y la delincuencia organizada son problemas enraizados en el movimiento universal de la globalización del derecho penal y del delito. Estos problemas no son nacionales, no los puede atacar un Estado de forma unilateral, porque son delitos que irrumpen, emergen de los confines de un Estado determinado y golpean a toda una región o inclusive a todo el mundo. Son problemas que atacan los bienes e intereses fundamentales de la comunidad internacional. Entonces, enfocado en esta forma, el problema de la delincuencia organizada, podemos dejar de considerar que siendo un problema transnacional, que está enraizado en la globalización de la que hemos hablado brevemente, de la globalización del derecho, pues los problemas que exceden del daño a un Estado determinado no pueden ser atacados, como decía yo, unilateralmente, porque ese ataque no va a tener eficacia por la misma ramificación de estos hechos delictivos. Entonces aquí sí se requiere, para atacarlos y para poder disminuirlos, se requiere de la cooperación, de la asistencia y del apoyo internacional. Si no hay ese apoyo internacional, no se podrá avanzar con eficacia en la lucha contra este delito y contra estas formas nuevas y terribles de la criminalidad. La delincuencia organizada es una forma nueva que aparece en el escenario delictivo. Es un delito transnacional tremendo, con el que no es factible, como decía yo, luchar aisladamente. Las organizaciones que constituyen la delincuencia organizada se caracterizan, y así lo han establecido, se ha establecido en los congresos internacionales, por varios factores, digamos algunos de ellos. La división del trabajo y la disolución de la responsabilidad individual en el seno de la organización. Intercambiabilidad de los individuos, el secreto, la mezcla de actividades legítimas e ilegales, la capacidad de neutralizar los esfuerzos de aplicación de la ley por medio de la intimidación y de la corrupción. Esto es muy importante. La capacidad especial de transferencia de las ganancias. Bien, en relación con este problema, que no es nuevo, en el que México no ha escapado al mismo, sobre todo el narcotráfico y del lavado de dinero, de organizaciones criminales, se ajustan a los patentes universales de la delincuencia organizada, donde son muy conocidos los cárteles de la droga. Pero además, en el narcotráfico también existen organizaciones que se dedican al secuestro de personas, al robo de vehículos, al tráfico de indocumentados, y todos estos son delitos asociados además. Igualmente, se admite que el avance de la delincuencia organizada está relacionada con la corrupción de los mismos cuerpos de seguridad pública. Y este es un hecho muy lamentable que está ocurriendo en México. La corrupción de los cuerpos de seguridad pública. Aparece, ya no hay la diferencia entre policías y ladrones, porque los policías también son ladrones. O sea, la corrupción los ha permeado. Para atacar estas situaciones, y ya desde el plano normativo, debemos decir que México cuenta como ya se ha señalado aquí en estos seminarios, cuenta desde 1886 con la Ley Federal contra la Delincuencia Organizada, así como también considerando conveniente la creación de un marco jurídico que permita a los bancos y a las autoridades prevenir y detectar las actividades de lavado de dinero a través de mecanismos que posibiliten identificar el origen de los recursos y evitar el ocultamiento de documentación e información relacionada con estos, entre otras acciones. ¿Qué quiere decir esto? Que una de las formas de atacar el narcotráfico y de atacarlo en forma internacional, con convenios bilaterales y multilaterales, es pegarle al corazón económico de las tremendas ganancias, las inusitadas ganancias y lucro que se obtiene por los cárteles, por la delincuencia organizada. Porque estos recursos que obtienen los reinyectan en la economía de sus países y en la economía de los diversos estados. Los reciclan y el producto de ese reciclaje lo vuelven a utilizar para continuar con sus actividades delictivas. Entonces, se han lidado los mecanismos, aparte de la prevención y represión, los mecanismos de lavado de dinero. En México, el delito de lavado de dinero está contemplado ya en el Código Penal Federal desde hace varios años. Y se ha estado reglamentando a través del sistema de intermediación de bancos, de los controles públicos como el de la Comisión Nacional Bancaria y de Seguros, etcétera. Recientemente se ha elaborado una nueva ley en contra del lavado de dinero que está por enviarse al Congreso de la Unión, en el que, aprovechando experiencias anteriores, como se han aquí señalado, se provea de mayores instrumentos y mecanismos para luchar contra este laundering money, este lavado de dinero. Pero no basta este problema de atacar el narcotráfico a través del lavado de dinero. Existen otros mecanismos también necesarios para llegarle al corazón de las ganancias. Uno de ellos es el ya existente decomiso por abandono, que se tramita por la vía judicial penal, la confiscación de estos bienes abandonados y decomisados por la vía judicial penal. Pero aparte de eso, y por la vía ya no penal, sino por la vía civil, en México se ha expedido la Ley Federal de Extinción de Dominio. En esta Ley Federal de Extinción de Dominio, el Estado logra, si obtiene sentencias favorables en el procedimiento civil, el Estado logra que los bienes utilizados por la delincuencia pasen a poder del Estado. Se extingue el dominio de estos bienes. No solamente si se demuestra que son utilizados por los delincuentes, sino además si se demuestra que personas ajenas a la actividad delincuencial misma, sin embargo, han tolerado, ¿verdad?, o han permitido que sus bienes se utilicen con estos fines criminales. está también a punto de llevarse a cabo una ley antisecuestros, una ley federal antisecuestros, que es otra de las formas en que opera terriblemente la delincuencia organizada y además fuera de la delincuencia organizada otras organizaciones delictivas de menor envergadura. Pero en fin, pero desde el punto de vista más importante del movimiento de normatividad, del movimiento jurídico, ha sido el que ocurrió a mediados del 2008, cuando se produjo la gran reforma al sistema, la gran reforma integral al sistema de justicia penal enmarcado en la Constitución política. Antes en la Constitución se hacían remiendos parciales, parches que no servían para nada. Finalmente se logró hacer una reforma integral al sistema de justicia penal que va desde las organizaciones policiales, de los sistemas de seguridad pública, pasando por la procuración, por la administración de justicia y por la ejecución misma de las penas, porque el sistema penitenciario también está en un caos tremendo en nuestro país. Este sistema integral de justicia penal tiene además, como se ha expuesto, se seguirá exponiendo en este seminario, tiene además la virtud de haber creado la oralidad en los juicios, de haber introducido los juicios orales que permiten que verdaderamente la justicia sea inmediata, la inmediación, la concentración de pruebas, la celeridad de los juicios, su publicidad, etcétera. Pero sobre todo permiten que se abandone el sistema actual ineficaz totalmente de la justicia de papel, la justicia mediatizada, en que los jueces ni siquiera conocen a los criminales, más que en fotografías de los sistemas de identificación fotográfica. En el juicio oral, el juez está en contacto, siendo un sistema acusatorio, no inquisitivo, el juez está en contacto directo con los protagonistas del delito, con los testigos, con las víctimas, con los acusados, las víctimas, los testigos, los peritos, etcétera. Este sistema de oralidad, ¿verdad?, seguramente va a traer grandes ventajas cuando se haya logrado uniformarlo en toda la República. Porque este es otro problema que tenemos, la fragmentación de la normatividad penal. En lugar de que haya un código penal único, hay códigos penales en todas las entidades federativas, en cada una de las entidades federativas, lo que dificulta la lucha contra el delito. Y en el marco procesal penal, pues hemos de decir que está por enviarse al Congreso de la Unión el nuevo Código Federal de Procedimientos Penales, enmarcado y derivado de la reforma al sistema constitucional de justicia penal, y que ojalá este Código Federal de Procedimientos Penales sirva, si no para unificar, porque los estados tienen el monopolio en materia penal de crear sus propios códigos sustantivos y sus códigos adjetivos procesales, sino lograr la identidad total, cuando menos que ese Código Federal de Procedimientos Penales pueda servir para uniformar los sistemas procesales en toda la República. Estas situaciones son importantes porque si bien la normatividad es un instrumento más de la lucha contra el delito, pues no es suficiente. Si se opacan los sistemas preventivos, si no se logra en este tipo de delitos la cooperación y la ayuda internacional. Veamos, por ejemplo, los problemas inherentes también al tráfico de drogas. Aquí se han mencionado, por ejemplo, entre otros casos, el tráfico de armas. El tráfico de armas tráfico e introducción ilegal de armamentos al país no se puede solucionar con convenios parciales con los Estados Unidos de Norteamérica. Tiene que haber un convenio de gran imagen que abarque todos los aspectos del tráfico de armas y en el que estén involucrados no solamente los sistemas de migración y de aduanas de los países, sino todo el problema, revisarlo y buscar mecanismos de cooperación para atacarlo. Porque si no, el problema del tráfico de armas nunca se va a ocupar, nunca se va a acabar. Acaban los medios de información de comunicar a la opinión pública que un comando delictivo acaba de anular a los custodios, a las autoridades que tenían la vigilancia de los almacenes en que se han decomisado las drogas. Los anularon y se llevaron todas las armas y todas las municiones y todos los uniformes que había en ese lugar. Entonces el cuento nunca acabar. Es cierto que el tráfico de armas no se puede imputar exclusivamente a los vendedores norteamericanos. Puede ser un tráfico oblicuo, triangulado, pero de todos modos entra por las fronteras al país. Entonces es necesario que haya un convenio de gran alcance, de total alcance para eliminar este gravísimo problema del tráfico de drogas. Se ha mencionado también el problema, se ha tocado también el problema del narcomenudeo. Es cierto que en México se está permitiendo no penalizar la posesión de drogas, la posesión de narcóticos, cuando se decomisa una cantidad que es necesaria nada más para el consumo diario de los sujetos, de los adictos. Porque desde luego que la enfermedad, la adicción no se puede evitar con penas. Las penas son para los delincuentes, la medicina y la terapéutica es para los enfermos. Pero si el enfermo, aparte de tener la posesión de narcóticos para su consumo, se dedica a ser además proveedor de esos narcóticos, de venderlos y ser proveedor, entonces ya pasa a ser no nada más un enfermo, sino es un enfermo delincuente. Entonces habría que emplear, además de la terapia, medidas de seguridad especiales e inclusive sistemas de punición. ¿Para qué vamos a darle más alcance al problema de la legalización de las drogas? Recordemos lo que pasó en la Unión Americana y en todos los países, cuando se acabó la prohibición del alcoholismo y se permitió el libre comercio y consumo del alcohol. Pues entonces, ¿qué ha ocurrido? No nomás en Estados Unidos, en México, en otros países. Pues que se instaló una generación de alcohólicos, una generación de borrachos, de que han servido las instituciones que combaten el alcoholismo. Pues muy poco. Y si a esa generación de borrachos, de alcohólicos, que es muy peligrosa y que está tremendamente asociada con el delito, le vamos a aumentar una generación de drogadictos, entonces el problema, en lugar de solucionarse, se agrava, ¿verdad? De manera que estas son algunas de las principales reflexiones que me inspira a mí el problema de la delincuencia organizada que ataca profundamente el Estado de Derecho. Por último, quiero señalarles a ustedes que dentro de ese sistema integral de la justicia penal, enmarcado ya en la Constitución, pues se ha permitido una investigación proactiva de estos delitos graves. ¿Por qué? Porque estas formas delictivas perfeccionadas por los delincuentes no se pueden combatir simplemente con los viejos sistemas procesales, con los antiguos y normales medios y modos de investigación. se ha introducido la llamada investigación proactiva, que ha dado muy buenos resultados. Lo señalaba aquí el representante de la Procuraduría de la República. O sea, el arraigo, el cateo y la intervención de las comunicaciones han sido necesarias para combatir el delito, siempre que con respeto a los derechos humanos, ¿verdad?, esas medidas estén autorizadas y supervisadas, como se establece en la Constitución Política, por los jueces de control, por los juzgados de control, que son los que deben dar previamente la autorización para estas medidas proactivas, ¿verdad?, y supervisarlas, y evitar que sobre pretexto de las mismas se desvíen, haya desvíos y abusos del poder y se lesionen los derechos de las personas, los derechos humanos de las personas. Entonces, estos sistemas deben perfeccionarse y vigilarse y supervisarse y reglamentarse, si no, no se podrá seguir adelante. Hay muchos otros temas que se pueden tratar, pero en este breve lapso que se me ha señalado, pues no me es imposible tratarlos. Sin embargo, ¿verdad?, debemos continuar divulgando, defendiendo y vamos haciendo sugestiones y consejos, ¿verdad?, para ver cómo luchamos coordinadamente contra este flagelo, coordinadamente, sin dejar de entender que se trata de problemas transnacionales, de la delincuencia transnacional. Si no lo hacemos desde esos enfoques, poco lograremos avanzar. Muchas gracias por su atención.
Muchas gracias, señor ministro Fernández Doblado. Creo que es cierto, mientras comprendamos que este es un problema globalizado, también se podrán encontrar soluciones multinacionales para este grave problema. Y ahora tengo el enorme gusto, el gran honor de presentarles a nuestro siguiente conferencista, el licenciado Gary King, quien es Procurador General del Estado de Nuevo México, y a quien le damos la bienvenida. Quizá además Gary King sea el único procurador que tiene Estados Unidos que tiene un doctorado en un área científica, pues es doctor en química orgánica. Él fue litigante, fue legislador de su estado antes de ser electo procurador en 2006, realizó estudios de química en la Universidad de Nuevo México y recibió su doctorado en química orgánica en la Universidad de Colorado. Posteriormente, en la Universidad de Nuevo México, estudió y se graduó de licenciado en Derecho en 1984. Sirvió por más de 12 años como legislador local en el estado de Nuevo México y por 10 años como director del Comité de Protección de los Consumidores en el mismo estado. Promovió siempre los derechos humanos y la protección del medio ambiente. En 1998, el procurador King se convirtió en asesor de manejo del medio ambiente del Departamento de Energía de los Estados Unidos en Washington, implementando programas de cooperación entre la Federación, los estados, los condados y los gobiernos locales de los nativos americanos, fomentando actividades en favor del medio ambiente con un gran impacto social. Como Procurador General, ha fomentado por primera vez que se considere como delito el tráfico de personas y ha combatido a nivel internacional este tráfico de personas y también las políticas de esclavitud. Me tardaría más que la conferencia en leer completo el impresionante currículum de nuestro conferencista Gary King, así que sin mayores preámbulos le demos la bienvenida. Muchas gracias.
Well, thank you. I was going to give a little bit of my biography up here, but I I think you have all the biographies, so thank you very much. I appreciate that. It certainly is a great honor for me to have an opportunity to address this group because this is a topic that has been a very important one to me and to the Attorney General's office in New Mexico during the period where I've been the Attorney General. I also want to thank the organizers of the conference for bringing this group together and for bringing me here. I think it's a great opportunity. I had some opportunity yesterday evening to meet with some of the Mexican officials that are dealing with the same problems as I am, and so that opportunity to meet informally is also very helpful, I think. You will think that Minister Fernandez Doblado and I collaborated on our discussions, I think, because what I have to say, I hope will follow on with what he talked about. But I want to talk a little bit about the experience that we have in New Mexico practically with dealing with trafficking on the border of trafficking of drugs, trafficking in arms, trafficking in human beings, and money laundering. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit today. But first I wanted to give you just a little bit of background on what the Attorney General's office in New Mexico has been dealing with on some other border issues. The Attorney General's office in New Mexico has statewide jurisdiction. I'm actually an elected official in New Mexico, so I'm elected by the people in the state of New Mexico. The Constitution calls for me to be the attorney that represents the state of New Mexico. That's both in civil matters and in criminal matters. So I have civil jurisdiction as well as criminal jurisdiction. Today I'll probably talk about the criminal jurisdiction primarily and issues that we have. Also, since July of this year, I was elected as the chairman of the Conference of Western Attorneys General. We call that CWAG sometimes, CWAG. But that's a group of 19 states in the western United States that cooperate and work together to work on our common legal issues in the states. And that'll become important later on, as you'll see, because of one of the initiatives that CWAG is being involved in. As part of my jurisdiction and working on issues on the border, I have an opportunity to work with a lot of other agencies. I work with federal agencies like Homeland Security. That includes the Border Patrol and the Immigrations and Customs Enforcement Agency. I work with our state police. In some states, the state police are under the Attorney General, but in New Mexico, they're a separate division, so I work with state police. I work with our state National Guard, and for the last few years, we've had National Guard troops that are posted along the border in New Mexico to help augment the work that's being done by the Border Patrol. I work with county sheriffs, and in New Mexico, as well as in most of the American states, I think each county has sheriffs that are independently elected, and so they have some authority of their own, so we work with the county sheriffs. And then, of course, we work with the mayors and the county officials in all of those counties as well. So you can see that there are a lot of different government agencies that have some purview on the border, and I think that's part of the job of the Attorney General to help coordinate all of those agencies in fighting the common problems that we have. And I think that Minister Fernandez pointed out how important that interagency cooperation is going to be in fighting the problems that we have in border security. We actually have a variety of issues that we face on the border. It's not all just about drug trafficking. One of the things in New Mexico that we've been dealing with for many years, and I served in our state legislature for 12 years, and so I dealt with a lot of these issues more on a policy basis as a state legislator than as the Attorney General. But we have a lot of families that have families on both sides of the border. We have a lot of children who are born in New Mexico whose parents live in Mexico. We have families that might live on one side of the border and work on the other side of the border. And so there's a lot of movement back and forth across the border. We provide health services and education services in New Mexico. We don't, as a policy, ask where a child is from. If they're going to school, if they register for school, we provide an education. If somebody comes into a hospital on our side of the border, we provide medical services. New Mexico is most recently has been a little famous because we have a policy in New Mexico where we issue driver's licenses to anyone that can show that they're a resident of New Mexico. They don't have to show what their citizenship is, and so we don't ask for the citizenship of someone before they get a license to drive in New Mexico. That's a very controversial issue in our current election. The Attorney General's office, I think, traditionally has dealt with certain issues of crime on the border. If a crime is committed in New Mexico and the perpetrator of the crime crosses the border into Mexico to try and avoid prosecution, the Attorney General's office has a division. We actually call it the Border Violence Division. It was called that before we had as much border violence as we have now. I think that's just what it was always called, but it's a little more prescient right now. But the Border Violence Unit specializes and has specialized in working with our extradition treaties to find criminals that have escaped into Mexico and bring them back into the U.S., or something that's sort of unique between ourselves and Mexico, I think, is the possibility of Article 4 prosecutions. I think some of you will realize that Article 4 of the Mexican Constitution allows for the prosecution of someone in Mexico for a crime that they committed in the U.S. Primarily that occurs, I believe, when it's a Mexican citizen that committed a crime in the U.S. and then returned to Mexico. But we certainly have had positive interactions and good interactions with the Attorney General's office in Chihuahua, which is our sister state, in prosecuting these Article 4 prosecutions. We've had violent crimes committed in New Mexico that have been prosecuted in Mexico, and the criminals are serving time in the Mexican prison system for the crimes that they committed. And so those have all been very positive interactions between ourselves and Mexico. Excuse me a second, I'm going to get my tea over here. So we've had this long-time interaction, I think, particularly with our sister state, with Chihuahua. The director of my Border Violence Unit is a woman named Maria Sanchez Gagne, and she was actually in the Attorney General's office before I came to be the Attorney General 4 years ago. And I think one of the reasons I mention that is because a lot of the successful law enforcement, I think, on both sides of the border comes from those personal interactions, from knowing who you're working with. I've had a good working relationship with my counterpart in the Chihuahua Attorney General's office for all of the 4 years that I've been there. Her term is going to be up this year, I believe, and so I'll have to develop a new relationship with the new Attorney General. But it's also possible that my term could end this year too. And in my case, since I'm elected, I'm running for re-election this year, and so possibly I'll be the Attorney General for another 4 years, possibly not. So I think that it's really important to develop the institutional knowledge between the two agencies so that it doesn't matter who the head of the agency is. But I think a lot of the work that gets carried on by the professional people that work in both of those offices and correspond with each other on a regular basis. Once again, I note that Minister Fernandez Dovalado talked about the need for international cooperation, because one of the things that we know is that these criminal organizations, the modern criminal organizations, do not recognize borders. We, as a side comment, some American AGs, some Mexican AGs had an opportunity to meet with a group of Italian prosecutors too last year, And one of the things that they talked about were the drug trafficking corridors that start maybe in South America, go through the Nigerian mafia, and then they go to the Russian mafia, and then they go into organized crime in Europe. That's one of the routes that drugs take to get into Europe. Those criminal organizations don't seem to mind working with each other and don't recognize, you know, some of the jurisdictional issues that we sometimes have. And so in order for us to effectively fight crime, I think that, that all of us who are involved in the law enforcement side of this have to recognize that we have to overcome those borders and those barriers that might be between us to cooperate to fight this international crime. And in New Mexico, we've been doing that in several ways. With regard to the Attorney General's office in Chihuahua, we have 3 MOUs, 3 memorandums of understanding. One of those deals with the effort to fight trafficking in drugs. One of those deals with the effort to fight trafficking in arms. And one of those deals with the effort to fight trafficking in human beings. And the human trafficking MOU is particularly interesting because the state of New Mexico, when I became the Attorney General, did not have a statute that made human trafficking a crime. We had a federal statute, but there was no state statute in New Mexico. And all of the other states on the border, California, Arizona, and Texas, all had statutes that prohibited that. So I was very worried when I became the Attorney General that New Mexico could become a corridor for trafficking in human beings. And so we persuaded our legislature to pass a law to prohibit human trafficking, but I was not successful in the first year. You would think it would be pretty easy to get your legislature to vote to outlaw human trafficking. But because of certain political interactions in our legislature, I wasn't successful the first year. So the next year, I had Patricia Gonzalez, who's the Attorney General in Chihuahua, come to Santa Fe, and we had a big press conference and rolled out our MOU to fight human trafficking and sort of made a bigger issue out of it, a bigger political issue out of it, and then it was easier to get our legislature to pass the law that prohibited human trafficking. So I got a lot of help from my counterpart in Mexico to make that happen. I think a really important issue for my colleagues in law enforcement in Mexico has been the issue of arms trafficking. We've talked about that a little bit here, but there's a great deal of arms that are bought in the United States. One of the speakers earlier today talked about the fact that there are a huge number of licensed gun dealers right along the border, about 10 times more gun dealers within 100 miles of the border per square mile than there are around the rest of the country. So that tells you something about the market for guns on the border, I think. So all of us attorneys general on the border have been working to try and identify arms dealers who are illegally dealing in arms. And my counterpart in Arizona, Terry Goddard, recently prosecuted a case where there was a dealer that was selling 50 caliber rifles to someone in Arizona. They were being transported into New Mexico, and they caught the arms dealers trying to transport them across the border between Columbus and Palomas, which is a very small border crossing. But they got caught there, and both the dealer and the trafficker have been prosecuted in Arizona for that crime, and I think we're continuing to try and look at that. One of the other things in our MOU on arms trafficking calls for the Mexican officials, when they find a gun that was used to commit a crime in Mexico, that they'll share the information on the serial number on the gun and other identifying information on the gun so we can try and find out where that gun was sold in the United States. And I think that ATF has a bigger program now than the one that we developed between our 2 states to try and identify, you know, the sources of guns here that are being sold there, and I think that that's going to be helpful. The fourth issue that we're really focusing on the border is money laundering, and the minister talked about that issue, but I think one of the places where we think law enforcement can be the most successful in helping to cut down on the amount of international crime along the border is to do a better job of identifying the routes for where money for illegal purposes is crossing the border. And the 4 border states in the U.S. through a lawsuit against Western Union, who as you might imagine, was one of the routes for money to be transferred. I'm not saying that Western Union was operating as a criminal enterprise, but people were using that wire transfer capability to do that. So we all worked together. We got a settlement in this lawsuit that's funding an international, but certainly a multi-agency task force to combat money laundering. And so I think that the new anti-money laundering laws that have been passed in Mexico, along with an extra effort on our side of the border, will help to cut down the flow of money that's being used for illegal purposes. We certainly hope so. I want to talk a little bit, and how am I doing? I'll have to speed up just a little bit, but I want to tell you a little bit about our efforts in training prosecutors and investigators in Mexico to deal with the Rule of Law project. I think that this is one of the finest projects that both of our agencies have worked on. But 4 years ago, Chihuahua was the first state that had the authority under the constitutional changes in Mexico to adopt the change in the judicial system from an inquisitorial system to an advocacy-based system. And when that occurred, because of the relationship that we have with the Chihuahua Attorney General's office, they asked us for training to train their lawyers how to do very basic things, how to do cross-examination, how to present evidence, and a lot of the investigators from the Chihuahua law enforcement offices came to New Mexico and worked side by side with our state police and with our crime lab personnel to train on how to do the modern criminal techniques, including just taking crime scene photos and doing blood spatter analysis. And so over the course of 3 years, we developed a good, close working relationship. Although I will tell you, as a side issue, one of the things that's sad for us is that several of the attorneys and investigators and the head of the crime lab in Chihuahua that trained with us in New Mexico all were assassinated during that 2 or 3 year period as well. So I have a great deal of respect for the bravery and for the determination of Mexican law enforcement officials to deal with these issues, because it is, of course, very dangerous for them to do what they're doing. But the crime lab in Chihuahua, the crime lab in Juarez are first rate. They have good equipment. They have good operators. And one of the positive stories that I wanted to tell is that in Juarez, there was a young person who was trained and working in the crime lab there that developed a technique for finding dehydrated, or for taking dehydrated bodies that were found in the desert and rehydrating them to the point that they could get fingerprints from the body. So that helped a lot in just identifying those bodies that are there. That's a whole new technique that was developed in Chihuahua and now is being used in New Mexico and other desert places to do the same kind of work. So there's a lot of benefit in the cooperation that we have between our two agencies, and it does go both ways. I've also had an opportunity to observe some of the trials in Chihuahua. I actually went to Chihuahua to observe a trial and was going to observe a murder trial at the new courthouse in Chihuahua, in Ciudad, Chihuahua. And there were so many people watching the murder trial, we couldn't get in. I mean, there was so much interest in the community. So we actually went and watched a civil, no, it was a criminal trial, but regarding to an automobile accident. And it was very interesting and positive to watch the defendant, who had been involved in this automobile accident, when the judge told him that he could get on the stand and tell his story. I think he was surprised. But I think that kind of interaction, even in those small cases, will develop a lot of respect within the community for the fact that they can go to the court and they can tell their story and not have to count on whether a judge or a policeman who may or may not be corrupt might be making a determination in their case without them even being able to tell their story. So I have gone to a number of states in Mexico and talked about the fact that I believe that the change in the judicial system will, over the long run, generate a lot of confidence in the general public about the ability of the system to deal with that. So I just think that it's a very positive thing. After about 3 years of this training that we did for Chihuahua, I had the attorneys general from 5 other Mexican states come to me and ask if we could do the same kind of training for them because they were starting to make the same changes. And we just didn't have the resources. So we were successful and very happy to get a grant from USAID that went to CWAG, to the Western Attorneys General, where we could develop a training program where we use all 19 of our offices to help train all of the Attorneys General offices and the prosecutors and the investigators from all of those AG offices in Mexico to do essentially the same kind of thing. And so this year under that grant, we've trained about 1,500 investigators and prosecutors from the AG's offices in Mexico. And of course, it's a basic training. It's about a week or 2 weeks. We're actually starting to do some advanced training now. Those training sessions are held in all of the western states, in Texas and New Mexico. I'll give you an example of one in New Mexico. We have a small town called Playas in southern New Mexico that the entire town was bought by the state of New Mexico. It used to belong to a mining company, and they were going to abandon it. So we bought the whole town, and we use it for law enforcement training now in New Mexico. So we were able to bring investigators from 8 different states and from the PGR to New Mexico and set up crime scenes in houses in this town where they could go in and find a new crime scene and do that crime scene analysis for 2 or 3 days. And then they actually had mock trials and did the trials for the next 2 or 3 days. And I think that kind of training is good in 2 ways. One is you get skills for all of the prosecutors and such, but the fact that they were from multiple states and from the federal government meant that there was a lot of cooperation between the AGs, staffs from different states in Mexico and from the federal government there in working on the trials. And that, once again, that person-to-person interaction, I think, is what it's going to take for us to be able to aggressively fight the international drug traffickers. So I think that that's a very positive thing. See what else I have here. I think that what I want to talk about for the last 5 minutes or so is the current status of the Merida Initiative. From our perspective, I have myself and a couple of other of the Western Attorneys General have gone to Washington, D.C. to testify in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee to point out the positive things that we think have occurred under the Merida Initiative. And that we really are pushing very strongly for a continuation of funding for the Merida Initiative. We're also pushing for a portion of the funding from the Merida Initiative to be directed to the state level. And I think that one of your other speakers talked about that they think that it's going to be positive for the state prosecutors to be more involved in prosecuting these international criminals. So we're working on that. Here's a small point in a big issue in the United States. Several of the Western Attorneys General believe that the new comprehensive health care bill that was passed by our Congress this year will have a positive impact on our ability to fight crimes related to drug trafficking because there's going to be more money in that bill for treatment and prevention of drug abuse and prevention of drug abuse. And a lot of the property crime we believe that's caused in this country is caused by people that are abusing drugs. And so if we can help more people to get off of the drugs that they're taking, we think it'll have a positive impact with regard to property crime here. But it seems to me like if we spend more resources in the United States treating people who have drug abuse problems and getting them to stop using the drugs, that'll have a more positive influence on our ability to slow down the amount of money that's being made by the drug cartels in Mexico and elsewhere. So, I hope that we see a positive effect out of that. There are, one of the things the minister talked about is this use of forfeited assets. When we were working with the Italians, they pointed out that when they're fighting the mafia in Italy, if they take property from a mafia leader, that they actually have a mechanism for giving that property back to the community rather than all of the property going to law enforcement, and that's been a very positive effect because these community members have made community farms, for instance, out of land that was taken from a drug lord. And I have on my desk in my office a bottle of olive oil that says it's olive oil from land that was liberated from the mafia. So we call it anti-mafia olive oil. But I think that if more of those resources go back to the community where they see the positive impact of working with the government to help fight those organized crime agencies that are operating in their neighborhood, that could be helpful. So we're introducing a bill in the New Mexico legislature this coming January that will give us the authority to use some of the forfeited assets for community development work. I think that's a tool that's going to be positive. We are finally, and I could talk for a whole half an hour on this topic, but in Arizona, I think more so than anywhere else, there have been problems with organized crime coming across the border and taking over houses that have been operated by human smugglers, not by traffickers, but by smugglers, by people who are the coyotes that are bringing people across illegally. They're taking over these entire houses and holding the people in the houses hostage and asking for more ransom from the families before they let them go, and it's generating some violence in Arizona. I think that all of us are concerned about the spread of other kinds of crimes like that as we crack down on the drug-related crimes. And so I think that we are all looking for ways to put more resources into fighting those kinds of crimes that are creeping across the border, and that's done through intelligence, through fighting the money laundering, all of those other kinds of things. So we have a lot of work ahead of us, but I just want to wrap up by saying that once again that I am very proud of my affiliation with my counterparts in Mexico. They once again have exhibited a great deal of strength and courage in dealing with the cartels. I think that it is a problem that won't be solved this year or next year, but if we all continue to work together in cooperation, and if we're able to get sufficient funding, that we will be successful. And so it's been my great pleasure to appear with Minister Fernandez Doblado and to have an opportunity to visit with a lot of the officials that are here. I have to go on to New York tomorrow, so I'm not going to be able to stay for the rest of the conference. But I'll be at dinner this evening, so I hope I have a chance to have some more interaction with all of you this evening. But thank you very much for listening to a little bit of what I have.
Thank you very much to Attorney General King and Minister Fernandez Doblado. Are there any questions for either of the two speakers? Okay, folks, well, I think we're wrapping up the first day of the conference. I think things went very well. Thank you all very much for participating. We're going to have vans taking everyone back to the hotel now. Dinner will be at 7 o'clock at Houston Mill House. It's right around the corner from the hotel, but we will have vans running, I think, from probably around 6:45 onwards. Judge Ann Williams for the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals, I think, has probably landed in Atlanta or is landing soon. She'll be speaking about her work in rule of law, reform and training at the dinner. So I hope that all of you can make it. And we'll see you outside. Thank you.